Welcome to Movies We Like, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network. I'm subprime Andy Nelson, and that over there is Pete Wright.
Hi.
Hey. On today's episode, we've got our first returning guest. That is right. It is Andy Nelson Prime, re-recording mixer, back with us to talk about his work on Wicked, as well as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, a movie he likes. Andy, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Hi, great to be back.
Oh, thrilled to have you back talking about everything you've been up to since we last chatted with you a few years ago. Most of which, I mean, you've been keeping busy with all these movies, but of course, right now, I mean, we're recording this right after Wicked just had its premiere, and you were a big part of creating the world of the audio for that. So let's kind of start with that. I mean, I'm very curious about musicals and in your role and everything. You've worked on a lot of musicals. I was going through your list. I mean, I think Hook, it doesn't really count as a musical, but there is a song sung in that one, and there are a few of those. But then, I mean, Evita, that was a big one.
Yes.
And what that was full on music from start to finish. In the role of like what you're doing, re-recording, mixing a film, do you feel there's much of a difference when you're approaching a movie?
You know, that's a really good question, because there is and there isn't. I mean, clearly, when you're putting a soundtrack of a movie together, no matter what it is, whether it's drama, thriller, comedy, action, music, you know, you're telling the story the best way you can through sound. So I work very closely with the director to try and achieve that vision, and it doesn't matter how it's being told. So yes, every movie has its challenges. Musicals are an extra challenge. And here's the thing why, having done so many of them now, and I've learned so much over the years. I mean, I learn on every movie. I never stop learning. And techniques change and ideas. But the thing about a musical more than anything is hugely important from the sound point of view to approach it early on with the idea of how are we going to achieve the best possible rendition of the songs. Now, what obviously you're going to do, what you're obviously going to do is you're going to look at every single song in the movie and pre-record it. So you're going to bring the artists in early. They're going to be pre-recording, usually with a temporary music track, because you're going to actually provide all the music recordings later, but they're going to have to work with the rhythm tracks and things to get all the tempos correct. So microphone choices, for instance, are so hugely important, because, you know, in the good old days of musicals, they'd be talking and then suddenly they'd sing a song and it would sound completely different. You know,
right.
We all grew up listening to those musicals. And of course, things have advanced to the point now where hopefully you don't hear any difference whatsoever. And the reason for that is the microphone choices early on. So it's all about pre-planning this before they ever shoot a film. I remember when I worked on Evita with Alan Parker, he pre-recorded. What he did, he storyboarded every shot in the movie himself. He would just do sketches of where he knew the camera wanted to be, etc., for every song. And then when he went into the studio with Madonna and Antonio Banderas and started to record the vocals, and because he had storyboarded it, he knew that in a particular moment in one song, Madonna would be running downstairs, for instance, and singing. Mm-hmm. So during the pre-record process, he had the foresight to get her a little out of breath, because then he knew that when he filmed it, if she was a little bit breathless on her vocal, it would match the way it looked, of course.
Wow.
Because if you don't do that, the artist is running or doing something or dancing and they're just singing normally. It sounds weird. You never connect. There's a disconnect between.
Right, sure.
So he brilliantly did that. The funny thing was, when he'd finished all those recordings with her, he contacted me and said, I feel like I've just made the movie, but I haven't shot a frame. and because he was exhausted from directing everything with all the visuals in mind, but they hadn't got to the set yet. So that's one example of how much pre-thought has to go into a musical, if you like. Wow, so now jump forward to today, and you know, ever since I worked with Simon Hayes, who recorded this Wicked as well, the production mixer on set, he and I did Les Misérables together. And that
was going to be my next question. Wasn't that done completely differently?
So that's what I was going to get to. So now forget the Alan Parker approach in those days. Now Tom Hooper says, I want to try doing the whole thing live as if it's a complete live show.
Yeah.
So of course that's a challenge beyond anything that had really been done before. And
totally
Simon Hayes,
way of working,
brilliant guy, just stepped up to the plate and said, okay, then, we're going to have to figure this out. Clearly, there's digital work that has to happen with the picture, because the artists, if they're going to sing live, you can't really have playback speakers on the set because it's going to corrupt the vocal in a sense. So they have to wear earwigs. Yeah. So, of course, when they're wearing an earwig and the camera's on them, unless it's one on one side, if the camera's, here and the earwig is here, you can get away with it. But often when the cameras are moving, you can't. So immediately you know that there's digital work has to happen to the visuals to get rid of all the earwigs after the event.
Oh, my God.
So all these things have to be thought out. Now, Tom Hooper shot Les Misérables a lot with 3 cameras, wide angle, medium, and a close. And he ended up using a lot of the close-up shots because he liked the feel, the immediacy of the actor in front of him. But again, that's a challenge for sound, because if you want to get a boom mic in, which is often the best sounding mic, but on a 3-camera shoot, you can't get the boom in very tight because the other 2 cameras are going to see it. The close-up will be fine, but the medium and the wide are going to see the boom. So tremendous challenges, and I have to say that Simon Hayes just rose to the occasion brilliantly. The other problem you've got also is that you've now got to deal with actors that can sing well and consistently. Because, for instance, take the opening prologue in Les Misérables. I think it's a 4-minute piece that Hugh Jackman sings. Something like that.
And he's in water with a giant ship moving across the set.
That's the very opening of the film, which, by the way, the water splashing corrupted all the microphones. And so that was a nightmare for Simon. but that's another story. But no, the prologue starts just a little later than that. It's once he's stolen, if you remember the story, he steals some gold
bread.
from. Well, that's what gets him in prison is the bread, but he steals when he goes to when they... priest puts him up for the night.
Sure.
And that's when he has his come to Jesus moment, literally. And he sings the soliloquy. The problem with that is it's a 4-minute piece that was continuous. How many times are you going to ask him to sing that perfectly? So the thing that Simon had on that was he was able to more or less say cut if the sound wasn't working, because they weren't going to put Hugh through that whole thing and then say, oh, well, none of it's any good.
Right. They already knew. Okay.
Unlike a normal film where you'd say, well, we're just ADR, what we didn't get. Tom never wanted to do that. He needed it to be live. So anyway, so that was the experience on Les Misérables. So now you come to Wicked, which I first saw the show, many years ago with my wife. And I remember within 10 minutes turning to her and saying, this is going to be a great movie one day, because there was something really cinematic about the presentation of that show when I saw it on stage, and I absolutely loved it. And so jump forward to the film that I was doing with the producer, Mark Platt, who is the producer that's primarily responsible for staging the Wicked show. He's everything to do with Wicked is through Mark Platt's production. And I did La La Land, which he produced. When I finished La La Land, Mark said to me, Wicked's coming. And how long ago was La La Land? 9 years now? I don't know.
Yeah, 2016.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, 7 years, 8 years. So every 6 months, I'd email him and say, is it coming? Am I going to do it?
You thought you said.
Yeah, he'd say, yeah, it's coming. And at that point, they actually had an English director. So my assumption was I'd probably have to go over to London to do the soundtrack. And anyway, as we moved through time, of course, it changed. It became John Chu, who I'd never met. So I immediately felt, well, it's all very well for Mark to say that, but the director might not want me, he might want people he normally works with or whatever. So I was out at one of the BAFTA Awards in London. I think it was on West Side Story or Elvis. I can't remember. One of the years I was out there a couple of years ago. Yeah. And I extended my stay to London by an extra day and went up to the set of Wicked. And I actually walked into the set where in the Wizard's Throne, it was
wow, yeah,
because it was so big. I looked up at the ceiling so many times thinking, this is unbelievable, because you're so used to seeing in movies all the digital effects. And when you actually go on to a practical set that's real and built, and by the way, John, a lot of the stuff in Wicked was very practical, and I think it's so perfect for that because the actors really get to experience the environment.
Right.
I was just blown away by it. And then Jon was shooting, and we would grab every 5 minutes. He would take a break from the shot while they set up, and he'd run out to the back and chat with me. And that was it. And I was done. And I got back in the car to go to the hotel, and I thought, I have no idea if I'm hired or not. I can't tell. he couldn't focus on me, and I couldn't. I was nervous, and after all these years, I mean, it was my audition,
Yeah.
So
right.
anyway,
Wow.
he did hire me, and jump forward to today, and it's been an extraordinary experience. And again, Simon Hayes, brilliant job, live singing. Now you get Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande. I mean, the singing is unbelievable. We talk about voices that are incredibly compatible. I remember hearing a long time ago about Paul Simon and Art Garfunkel, that they sang in such a way that one mic would capture their vocals better than individual mics on them. There was some sort of acoustic interaction in their voices. I read this or saw it on a documentary by the sound engineer that worked with them. So I know it was the real thing. And he said that there was something about their voices just working in harmony and together that somehow captured on one mic really beautifully. And I have to say the girls are like this. They're very much like that. When they sing together, it's just pure heaven. And it really was a dream. And I think that, again, going into the shoot, they weren't sure what they could capture live. Now, different type of movie than Les Mis, because you've got dance sequences and things. And often in dancing, of course, you can't, the physicality doesn't allow.
Right.
Sure.
So, it's captured live wherever it can possibly be captured. And we had a brilliant vocal engineer mixer, an editor called Robin Bainton from England, who really took every single line of vocal, every single angle, and just comped it in such a way that it was absolutely beautiful. Obviously working in tandem with Myron Kirstein, who's the picture editor, and selecting the takes that they wanted visually and things. But at the end of the day, it's as real as it can be. And I'm incredibly proud of it. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Are you all already busy working on part 2, or do you have a brief respite before you kick in with that one?
I do, yes. The picture department don't, and nor does John Chu. Obviously, he's taken a slight break for the birth of his baby and a bit of publicity on this film, which he's going to be crazy busy on for a couple of weeks here.
Sure.
But no, they've started to work on it. It was all shot. Both films were shot at the same time.
Back to back, yeah.
So I've seen an assembly of it. It's going to be fabulous. And they've now got to obviously do all the fine tuning and work that's needed. But I won't probably start the mix until, spring of next year, maybe May, June, July, somewhere like that. I did this one. I started this one I went to London for to attend the orchestra recording sessions at Air Lyndhurst Studios, and in early June, I think. And then I actually started the mix towards the end of June, and we finished at the end of September. So it'll be similar to that next year, probably. Maybe a month earlier if we're lucky.
Yeah. Is that and that's about as long as you're normally working on a film, right? It doesn't change whether it's a musical or not.
No, not really. I mean, obviously, it's some of it's on because of budget, and if it's a fairly low budget film, they're certainly not going to give you that length of time to do a sound mix.
Sure, yeah.
But this was a good amount of time. We didn't feel too rushed. We didn't. Here's the lovely thing: it was done in such a way that we didn't need to work late nights. We didn't need to work weekends, which is so wonderful because when you're subjected to sound mixing, loud pressure levels and things all day long, by 8 or 9 or 10 at night, it's, for me anyway, I know I'm not doing my best work. And you do that day after day without any days off, and it's debilitating. And I've done many of those over the years. And this was a delight that, come 7:00 at night, we would sort of say, see you tomorrow.
Yeah,
and that
right,
was
right.
like, wow, that I can handle that. It was good. And I think creatively, it's so much smarter because you often look, I've done mixes at midnight and I come in the next morning and the first 2 hours you're unpicking some of your work because you say,
Yeah.
well, what were we thinking?
Yeah. So
And
some different guy did that mix. Yeah.
yeah, it's an expensive waste of time, to be frank.
Right.
You stop at a
Yeah.
good time, get some, rest, come back, and you just carry on where you left off. So I actually think it was so much more productive and better for everybody all around. And
Well, and I think that speaks largely to any of kind of creative work. Like you want to have, your best energies to put forth. And anytime you're working long hours for multiple days, I mean, it can wear you down to a point where you're just not delivering anymore. So I think that's smart.
well, I think there's a thing in Hollywood, sort of. It's almost there are certain people that think if you're not putting those sort of hours in, you're not doing everything you can, And
Yeah,
I just think I think it's so smart when people don't expect that and understand that the best result isn't going to come that way.
Yeah, it's hard, having worked on like small independent films. Sometimes it's like you're limited with your budget. It's like, well, we only have this many days, so we've got to do, crazy long days to kind of get everything done. As opposed to, when you have the time and you can say, we don't need to work crazy long days. We can work, relatively normal days and get the job done better. And I think it's smart, but it's hard to always have that. Yeah.
No, it is. I know it's a luxury
Yeah.
to have that time, but ultimately it's not any more expensive. That's the thing, because we work under sort of union hours, if you like, it does get expensive at night. And I've often said, rather than doing 2 late nights, let's just add an extra day. You'll get so much more done in a normal day than you would in 2-3 hour blocks in the evening, So it doesn't ultimately make it more expensive, but you do have to have the luxury of more time. Yeah.
Yeah.
A question about I'm going to call it the responsibility to Wicked. I mean, as you said, you saw it when, years ago. I assume you saw at least close to original cast. Did you see?
I never saw Idina or Kristen. No, I'd love to have seen them. No, it was the London cast, and I don't remember who it was. I'm sorry.
There is something about seeing the stage show and the fact that the stage show is sort of mutable, right? Like it changes from cast to cast, from location to location. It's a thing that's sort of a living, breathing orchestration of parts and voices. And Wicked has become, over the last decade or so, a staple in musical theater. And I'm curious how you approach these properties from the perspective of capturing a print, like a fingerprint of sound that is going to essentially replace all prior knowledge of what this thing is?
Yeah, that's a really good question again. And I'll tell you when it hit me hard. So when I went to London to do just to witness the recordings, I wasn't part of recording the orchestra, but I wanted to be in the room. I wanted to experience getting to know Stephen Schwartz, the original composer, lyricist for the show, who wrote everything. I hadn't met him up to that point, so I wanted to have a few days where I could just share a room and listen to his thoughts. While I was there, I also went to see the show to refresh my memory while I was in London, just prior to starting on the film, really, because I needed to do a little refresher. But here's the thing. For about 2 months prior to me starting the picture, I listened in the car every day to the studio to the Broadway cast recording. And I just listened endlessly to it because I wanted to immerse myself in every song, get familiar with all the dramatic dialogue sections of the movie. Didn't worry me at all. I just needed to feel I had to focus on these songs.
Yeah.
So I spent hours and hours listening to the songs over and over. Just because I wanted to get it into my blood system, I needed to feel the balancing and the pertinent moments when a certain line was stronger than somewhere. I just needed to feel it. So I go to London. Now, remember, in the cast recordings and up to this point on the show, the most that anybody's ever heard musically is about a 16-piece pit orchestra, roughly that many. So I go and sit down at Air Studios in London, and Steve Aramis, who was the executive music producer and also conductor, raises baton to the orchestra, and they start playing. I can't even remember what the first song was we were recording. And I just threw everything I'd learned out of the window because I had never, and the world has never heard it played like that, with a full, magnificent sounding, beautiful orchestra. Now, this is just the orchestra section. On top of that, when it was all finished and mixed in, it then comes back to LA, and the music producer, Greg Wells, very well-known, talented, Grammy-winning producer and musician, did all the drums, the bass, the keyboards, the guitars. So now you've got all the rhythm tracks against a 90-piece orchestra. It was unbelievable. So to answer your question, I threw everything out and just started fresh because okay, so there's the music. Now you've got the two girls, well, and Michelle Yeoh, of course, and Jeff Goldblum, but primarily Glinda and Elphaba, the two leads,
right,
who are now delivering it in a way that it hasn't been delivered before either. It's obviously going to be a completely different experience. So I think it was less about trying to preserve the original as opposed to just saying, this is a brand new experience. And you're not going to experience it like this again. And the irony is, when I did go back to that show in London while I was there for the orchestra recording, it felt small. All the memory I had of that show, which blew me away, still blew me away visually and everything, but the sound felt small because I just left a studio with 90-piece orchestra playing. So I sort of thought, okay, I can't dwell on all this, everything that's gone before. I now have to focus on how do we make this a huge, big screen soundtrack. And, and I had the benefit now, of course, Dolby Atmos, endless numbers of speakers I can play with in the room. It was like a little, I was in Disneyland. I was having the best time ever.
Okay, I just have to ask before we turn eventually to Butch and Sundance. You talk about Atmos. I'm going to sit down in this to see this movie in the biggest screen that we have in the Portland metro area, and I am going to be listening for it in Atmos. What are you most excited about for me to hear?
So the advantage of Atmos for me, because Atmos is generally a tool that people think of sound effects. And, when I did Star Wars, we would have the TIE fighters go down.
Flying over you.
Right.
Things like that. So you generally think of Atmos as, this is going to be, fantastic sound. Something like Dune, where you've got a lot of low end, you've got a lot of, So the advantage of Atmos for music is because we have full range surround speakers, I feel you can immerse yourself a little bit more musically because in 7.1 or 5.1, they're filtered surrounds that you lose a lot of the low end. In Atmos, you don't. So for me, the beauty of Atmos is just to feel the sonic sound of the music everywhere around you. Now, I'm not a fan of bringing the music too far out into the room. Personally, I like it to feel attached to the screen. I like it to be part of the sort of overall sense. 70% needs to be in front of you on the screen. But gotcha. I love the feel of it all around you. So the recordings that Nick Woolidge did in London for the orchestra, he and I sat down and discussed how to treat the Atmos. So what he did is he'd placed microphones overhead in the studio so he could capture something to go above us. He did created the surround so that I had plenty to play with. And then when I got it into the mix room here at Warner Brothers in Burbank, I was then able to just go, okay, listen to every single channel and feel where it all sits, but still primarily aimed at the screen. So that's just my taste, and I feel it's just better to sort of glue it to the screen in that sense. And then that was the main advantage to Atmos, was the feeling that you could have it, a presence of that music all around you without being aware of it.
Yeah.
I could turn off the overhead speakers on and off, and you wouldn't really detect a change because I never wanted you to realize it was there. But when it was, it just felt natural. And so for me, that's the advantage of mixing in Atmos. But we did an IMAX mix, which sounded great as well. The 5.1, the 7, we're really happy with all of the different versions. It's just that you start with Atmos as your kind of primo, if you like, and then have to adjust.
Kind of go from there. Yeah. Knowing the history of this particular story and, Maguire's original vision of actually taking it from Frank L. Baum's books, The Wizard of Oz and everything, which in and of itself is a classic Hollywood musical. Did John Chu, did your team, did any of the creatives look at that as an element that you were also trying to figure out, like, are there nods? Are there things that we want to kind of like a tip of the hat to the original Wizard of Oz in a way? I mean, obviously the musical on Broadway already likely did some of that, but knowing that this is a movie, Wizard of Oz is a movie, is there some thread that we're seeing or hearing or anything?
Well, it's a prequel, it's prior to Wizard of Oz. So as you know, so as I wouldn't say so much in film 1, but film 2 takes us toward that sort of transition, if you like. And I don't know that I should speak any more about that because of, well, the other thing is it's not meant to be The Wizard of Oz. Obviously, it's got nothing to do with that.
Yeah,
as a new version, a new story, but there is a connective tissue going through.
Yeah,
and so. I'll just, I think that's all I'll say at this point.
No, and that's fine. I guess I just meant more like, not even story-wise, but just in the scope of like the Hollywood tradition of recognizing that it's coming, like all of this really is kind of the foundation is this other musical. And I just didn't know if there was any acknowledgement on the part of people involved. Yeah.
There's definitely some hat tipping.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll keep our eyes peeled for that. I'm looking forward to it. We haven't had the opportunity to watch it yet, but it looks fantastic. I mean, the casting is great. Everybody is just I know the internet's really excited about a lot of the casting, and I just think it's going to be a very exciting and big movie. I'm very curious about the split and how all of that's going to go as far as splitting it from one movie or from one story into like the two parts.
Well, I'll tell you this much. Again, going back to my history of musicals, the transition, when you're in a theater, as you know, when you get to a crucial point and the curtain drops and you go off and have whatever you're going to have, a glass of wine or wander around, there's that. It's like having a palate cleanser, isn't it? You come back, you sit down, the lights go down, and no matter what you've just seen, you're ready for the second part of the story. And Wicked, undoubtedly, as you know, ends on a big note for the end of part 1. I think John Chu and the studio were so smart to split it because without going into details on any of the other films, some of the transitions in that middle section are tough to do because you can go from a very dramatic moment to a lighter moment. And how do you turn that corner? Well, you turn the corner in the theater beautifully by closing the curtain. Hard to do that inside of one movie. Also, when you've got a lot of story, something's going to give. So and what happens is that the songs become closer and closer and closer together because the bulk of it, you need to deliver every song. It's tough. So it doesn't leave you a lot of room for any of the character development and things. So I'm a huge fan of what John's done because I can tell you now, film 1 delivers as a standalone, no question about it. 100% it delivers. It tees you up beautifully, but you don't feel deprived in any way. But what it allows are these sections where you can really get to know the characters, and you wouldn't be able to do that if you tried to make everything into one film. And when I saw the show recently again, that reminded me of how tough that is because it would go song to song.
Yes.
And you can't get to know everybody and enjoy the drama of and the relationship of the two leads. When they first meet, they don't like each other, as you know, and it's about how does that evolve. There's a beautiful sequence in the middle of film 1, which is where they go to the Oz Dust dance, and I can't wait for you guys to see that. It's so powerful. But you couldn't have done a sequence so intimate and so beautiful as that if it had all been one movie. You wouldn't have had the time.
I think it hits. I don't think I'm alone when I say that there is a certain cynicism that has grown up around splitting movies to part one, part two. And it came in an era maybe 10 years ago when we had a lot of the YA properties that were coming out and were split from 1 to 2. And maybe we can rationalize why they did it narratively, but it didn't. It just felt like they wanted 2 tickets instead of 1 to be sold. Yeah. And so I can understand the criticism that came when it was announced that Wicked was, because we already knew Wicked was going to be coming as a movie, but when it was announced that it was going to be split, I don't think that was met with universally, positive appeal, right? And so it's refreshing to hear your take on it, that it's earned. That's certainly my biggest concern, that by the time we get to the big moment at the end, that it doesn't feel like you're just going to let me down because you don't. Les Mis is a great example. Why not just give me a 3.5-hour movie if that's what it takes? So
yeah, I think, look, I agree with you. I think there's a sort of a cynical view of a cash grab that people do. Like you said, if they, why do it? Listen, I watch streaming programs now that are eight episodes, and I know that could be told in 4. There's so much, so much padding that goes in. It drives me insane. And I would be politically, it would be hard for me to say something about this if I didn't feel that this was right. But I can tell you now, this is right. There's no question this is right. I think and I've seen I've sat with the audiences. It's not deliberately done to try and pad out something. This is definitely somewhere where you want to be with these characters. You want to go through what they're experiencing. There's got to be a journey. There has to be an arc in their relationship, because it's an incredible relationship between the 2 leads. You can't do that too quickly. And having, again, seen the show recently, it's done pretty fast.
Yeah.
And I think that the film allows you the luxury of really, so I hope that criticism goes away.
Yeah.
Me too.
Once everybody gets a chance to see it, we absolutely can't wait. Well, it's coming soon, so we'll have a chance to talk about it right around Thanksgiving here in the States.
Yes.
What do you have, before we switch gears, any big projects that you're getting started on or working on right now as next in the line?
Well, obviously, apart from the second movie next year, I'm actually going to do. There's a lovely little book that Richard Osman wrote called The Thursday Murder Club, and Steven Spielberg, massive
fan.
I
am sorry, I can't speak right now. Are you serious? I didn't even know that was coming. This is huge news for me.
With a brilliant cast, and I'm going to be Chris Columbus is directing it. And I am actually going to see it tomorrow night for the first time in its rough cut form, and I cannot wait, because just a tiny personal story here. When my wife read the book, halfway through, she said to me, "There's something weird here." And I said, "Why?" She said, "I think that the description of this retirement home is where my parents are." And we did some research and found out that indeed Richard Osman's mother was at the same retirement home as mine. And he based the entire story on this fictitious. So as soon as they announced the movie, I called up my contacts at Amblin and said, "Okay, I have to do this film because I have a relationship to this story immediately." So,
oh my goodness!
So I'm going to do that next March, April. Yeah.
Wow, fantastic.
Outstanding. I am giddy. I don't care about any of this other stuff. I can't wait to see.
Look up the cast, Pete. Look up the cast. You'll be blown away.
Oh, wow.
Ben Kingsley, Pierce Brosnan.
Holy cow.
Fantastic cast. And you'll know who they all are if you know the book.
Naomi Ackie, Daniel Mays, Pierce Brosnan, Henry Lloyd Hughes, Jonathan Pryce, David Tennant. Wow. Okay, well, this is fantastic.
Okay.
Well played.
It's gonna lots of great stuff, obviously. So we'll keep watching, and we'll hopefully get you in for a future conversation about one of these other movies.
Sure.
But right now, let's shift our conversation and start talking. I want to talk about Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But one of the things that you came to me with was, an idea of talking about just a number of different films that affected you over the course of your life, Butch Cassidy being one of them. And I'm just curious if you could, just a few minutes, just kind of take us on a journey of like some of these movies that have meant so much to you over your life and kind of those key points.
Sure. Well, obviously I'm not going to talk about Local Hero again, but that
Yes.
was one of them for sure.
That was one of them, yeah.
Sure.
And I've tried to analyze this over the years myself, and I think it's what drew me into loving what I do right from the beginning, which was the emotional connection with things. The thing about Butch Cassidy that I particularly loved was it. First of all, that was the very first year I started as a projectionist when I was 16.
Okay.
In the movie theater outside London, and I threaded and ran that film for weeks. And I sort of fell in love with it because my love of movies was all being birthed at that time, really, because I was now physically holding and putting reels of film onto projectors that I'd always sort of imagined what that would feel like. And so there was a lot of emotions connected with these films. I mean, at the same time, we ran The Sound of Music for a month, and I fell in love with that. The thing about A Midnight Cowboy, by the way, was literally the first film I was taught to thread on the projector. So
Nice.
anyway,
Okay.
my connection to all these films is huge because it was a formative part of where I was going to head to in my career. I didn't know where I was going to head to. I had no idea. I just knew that I wanted to be involved in something that made me feel this way. When the lights went down and the images hit the screen and the sound came on, that was what I loved. So, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I had no idea I was going to end up working in sound particularly, except for the fact that I knew that when music came on, I was even more connected. So that was my thread. So one of the things that Butch Cassidy did to me, I love Burt Bacharach's music. I just think Burt Bacharach is one of the coolest composers. There's something about his melody, his use of keys, just again goes right to the heart for me. So what I loved about Butch Cassidy, and looking back on it now over the years as a sort of working in sound, is the lack of music. But when it is there, it's phenomenal. It's so perfectly placed.
Very center stage. Yeah.
Center stage, take everything away, play the piece of music, and then take it away. And now we concentrate on all the natural sounds. And there's some beautiful, simple sounds in Butch Cassidy that connect you to what those two characters are really feeling and going through. So for me, it's a film I return to just because of my love of cinema. It's as simple as that. I mean, I can remember another instance where I was watching Death in Venice, the Visconti film, and his use of Mahler's Fifth Symphony, the Adagio in the Fifth, I was just like crying on the inside. It was so beautiful. And again, it was that link of image and music that had such a profound effect on me that, I never imagined as a 16-year-old that I'd be sitting talking about mixing giant movies like this. I mean, who would have known? So, but I knew that connection was there for me. So that's where, for me, those moments in those stories, in those formative years for me, was so important. Like, I can remember I can't remember the age I was, but let's say I was 14, sitting in the movie theater, again in London, watching Hard Day's Night. And I never left my seat. They didn't come around and kick you out in those days. I sat there and watched it 3 times around without moving.
Oh,
I think
those are the days.
I mean, I think we're roughly 20 years difference in age, and I think that's told. All 3 of us were projectionists. Andy, do you remember your first film that you thread?
That I threaded?
Yeah,
I don't remember it, but yeah, what would that have been? I can't remember.
I I feel like it's telling that I remember mine and that my film, no, it wasn't anything like Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. It was Honey, I Blew Up the Kids.
There you
That's
go.
what I learned to thread and had to watch way too many times.
That's fun. That's a fun one. And I bet you remember everything about that movie, every scene change, I mean, I used to work in the theater when we changed over reels, so I can remember where the Q dots. I can remember the Q dots in those movies.
Right.
Our theater was a reverse projection. My first theater was a reverse projection on glass. And so I remember the entire film backwards. It's very strange to actually watch. I watched it with my kids when they were younger, and it's very strange to see it in order. Everybody's moving the wrong direction. So.
That's so interesting. Do you know, I heard a story about a director, a big name director, that when he gets bored with watching the film, when they're cutting, he actually runs it in reverse, not backwards. I mean, flipped the way you're saying, left to right to left, because it gives him a completely different perspective on the edit. I thought that was such an interesting thing, because you're seeing it in a completely different way, and yet it's the same thing.
Right, you might notice things differently and stuff.
Yeah. So I thought that was such an interesting.
Well, and especially because I suppose you get so used to things, like anytime you're in an edit or you're watching that stuff so often, and just that little shift is probably giving you a whole new take on things.
Yeah, I think it does. I think again, because I watch these reels over and over again when I'm working, and you just have this sense of automatic timing of when someone moves off, there's going to be a cut, and you flip it, and I think you lose those timings. Yeah. And suddenly you're seeing, and then you go, why are we holding on this shot for so long? We don't need to do, maybe it just refreshes your memory in a completely different way. And I thought it was fascinating to hear that this person did that. So,
well, yeah, it's like Soderbergh does that on like some of Spielberg's films. Like he's taken, I think, Raiders of the Lost Ark and removed all the sound, and I think he also turned it black and white, and would play it just to watch the pacing and how Spielberg would pay attention to the edits and everything. And you can notice it so much more when you strip all of that other stuff out and you're just watching those elements.
Just your senses are more focused. Yeah, sure, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's good. I know editors that have come in and turned off the sound entirely and done the same thing because they just want to feel the pace of something. If it's a previous editor that's gone on to something else and a new editor takes over, they want to just feel the rhythm of things without the distraction of a piece of music or something, which is often put there to help the edits. But in some ways, if you take that off, it sort of exposes the edits, and maybe it allows a new editor to see it in a different way. And so I've seen people do that before. It is true. I think you can. There are picture editors that like to cut with music right from the first frame. And I'm old fashioned, and I think that maybe I think what you're doing is maybe masking a good edit or hiding the possibility of better edits by just allowing music to sort of distract you almost. Yeah. So I do believe that sometimes stripping it down is a good thing. And it's like when I'm mixing, I mean, if I'm not sure of the story or anything, I mean, I turn stuff down, I turn it off. And I just watch this. I just want to hear what they're saying and forget everything else. And sort of maybe some of the answers will get revealed as to why I'm not figuring out quite how the mix should flow at that point. So I think it can be distracting when you're trying to figure out the correct sort of story line.
Yeah. I want to talk about it within Butch Cassidy. Since we're talking about music. Yeah. Right in the middle, we get the fantastic bicycle montage with raindrops are falling on your head. And I don't remember when it happened because this movie is one of my favorite movies of all time. But I remember the first time seeing it, I thought that was bonkers. That was a weird choice. It was jarring and it took me out of the movie. And now I love it.
Yeah.
What's your stance on raindrops in this movie and how you chose to use this, George Roy Hill?
So it's actually, apart from the opening title, which is showing the Hole in the Wall gang, it's the first piece of music.
Yeah.
Yes.
That is the first piece of music. because you've now met your characters and you've had this red herring of Sundance going to the supposedly, getting this girl to take her clothes off and beautiful, and then of course she says, why are you always so late? And then you cut into, and you've met the bicycle because they've already shown the demonstration of that.
The future
Chekhov's bicycle, yes.
So I think the whimsy of that is just perfect because it allows you to take all the seriousness away, which has been fairly heavy up to that point, and you go, okay, this is just going to be fun. So for me, I didn't have that reaction you had at all. I found it was almost like I've been holding my breath and I could suddenly relax. It did that to me. I just loved the use of that.
Another element which ties into that song and ties into what you were saying a minute ago is the interesting idea of not including any additional sound effects of anything else going on in the scene.
Yes.
And I think that's an interesting way to approach this where, I'm assuming that at some point George Roy Hill, maybe it was right out of the gate. He always knew he wanted it to play that way. But I also think that there's probably a process of working with people like you and the sound designer and everybody to figure out, what are we going to be hearing here? Do we need to record all this sound,
Yeah. Well, I think, God, I would love to know how that did occur, whether that was a decision that came up at the beginning or whether it happened through trying things and deciding. I think ultimately the beauty of it is the fact that when you don't accompany it with any sound, it's very much inside their heads. It's not that's where I think it works. By actually removing everything else, it becomes their own little sort of silly fantasy. And if you'd made it too realistic underneath it, I can't remember if there's any sound effects. There may have been a bit of the bicycle, perhaps, but I feel it's all from his perspective, from Butch's perspective, sort of thing.
Yeah,
I think if there's any sound, because they drop it. All the montages are completely silent underneath the music, and the end is pretty montage heavy. Yeah,
the later stuff for sure. I can't remember on that one. I should watch just that one sequence again with that in mind. But I do feel it allows you to sort of, like I said, for me, it's like relaxing into the more fun buddy part of the story.
If there's anything, it feels like it's when the bike crashes through the fence.
Yeah,
like
that's when
I'm
the
like
sound
maybe
comes
there's
back.
like kind of a comedic crash sound.
Yes,
that might be the only thing, but it's very light though.
Right.
One of the things that's so effortless about that sequence is just how easily it gives us the complexity of their relationship, the threesome, that when she gets one line that says, "Do you ever wonder if I'd met you first, if we'd been together, if we'd be the ones together?" That sells you everything and completely sells or earns the last 3.5 minutes of them riding a bicycle and just clearly loving on each other, but in a way that wasn't, hypersexualized or anything. It's just lovely.
Absolutely. It has a charm to it and a real feeling that there was a love between them all at that point, which really pays off, of course, for their journey.
Right.
Yeah. Later in the film.
Yeah. The thing that I really took away on this most recent watch was the journey. I feel like the first half of the film is the part my brain always remembers, like the whole pursuit by LaChance and everything. But it was the part in Bolivia that really stuck with me this time, because it's like right before they leave, he takes the bicycle and shoves it off and is like "See you later, future," or something like that. And I was like, it's such an interesting shift in the film where we are now with these three who kind of are refusing to grow up, right? They want to stay stuck in the past, stuck in the way that things were, the way that things worked for them always before. When they try working, it never really works out. So they're just going to stick with that, even though everything else is changing around them. And to the point where they can't even stay in their own country. They end up going off to Bolivia to do all of this. And I find that such an interesting journey for these two characters who they're like little cowboy Peter Pans. They can't grow up. They have to keep robbing stuff. And it's the only way they can see moving forward.
Absolutely. And they're kind of running out of options all the time.
Yeah.
And as you said, it's like, okay, as one door shuts, we got to try and open another one and keep moving, but they're not moving forward. They're just, as you said, stuck in their familiar patterns. And I just everything about it, I love.
Yeah. So you saw this in London your first time, right? You're a young Brit.
When I was young, yes.
Yeah. Watching this movie that is ostensibly about the end of the Old West, right? Yeah. That the future is encroaching on the future, but it's the end of the Old West America. It is a movie steeped in American mythology. Mm-hmm. Do you remember your sort of youthful exuberance for that kind of alternative hero story?
Well, I think the thing about it was, for me, and this applied to a lot of different films as well, was the fact that, on a rainy day, on an afternoon in London, everything looked so exotic that was elsewhere. So for me, it wasn't so much any of the sort of mythology and the out west. It was just that it was very, very different from everything I knew and grew up with as a kid in London. And so it felt incredibly special and different. And so I didn't necessarily understand, I'm sure, any of sort of the history side of things. It was just the fact that I felt such freedom and interest and anxiety about or desire to go to somewhere and experience that sort of look and feel. And, South America, obviously very exotic. Certainly America itself, I never imagined being able to travel to America, at that age. So I think that was the thing. It was more that it was such a sort of a release away from my life in London.
Were you a fan of Westerns at the time? Were you watching?
Not particularly. Yeah. And I think that's why I used to love the spaghetti Westerns, by the way. I did like those. But I think that I wasn't a particular fan of Westerns, but I think that there was something about these characters that I really loved and connected to. And I think that Catherine Ross was a big part of that as well. I mean, she's very beautiful and just that sort of sense of just the fun and then the tragedy of the whole thing was such high drama to me, I think, at that time.
I feel like so much of the reason that I love this film is William Goldman's script. I find that he made the characters just so easy to kind of connect to from the beginning. And like watching the initial confrontation that Butch and Sundance have with the Hole in the Wall gang when they're going to revolt, and he has that whole the knife fight, and then he just punches the guy. He's like, "Well, there's no rules," and he like kicks him in the crotch. It's like, all
somebody better count 3, 2, 1, 3, 2, 1, go.
Yeah,
3, 2, 1, go. And I mean, again, you've got a sense of Butch at that moment being he was gonna gain control, but you didn't quite know how or what. And you could tell when he would walk up to Sundance and say, if he kills me, kill him. I mean, all those lovely little moments between them were the vulnerability. And just like when Sundance reveals he can't swim, it's the same wonderful moment of like, okay, these guys are pretty amazing, but they're really just human and have their flaws like everybody else. And again, I think that just for me drew me in all the time. So they weren't some sort of unapproachable hero type. They were just everyday guys that were, doing what they did.
Trying to figure out how to make it work.
It's not so much that they created characters that made me see myself on screen, but they made me see who I wanted to be. Yeah. I wanted to have the capacity for the wit and banter that these two guys have together. And it's the same thing, with the Sting, right? It's just that general camaraderie is very special. Like you talk about how Cynthia and Ariana are when they sing together. I get that feeling with Paul Newman and Robert Redford on screen.
100%. And obviously that comes from the script. It comes from great casting. And it comes from, I assume, I don't know that I've ever read this, but I would assume that Redford and Newman liked each other.
Yeah.
I think, I would hope, because I can tell you Cynthia and Ariana love each other. I mean, and that comes across. You can't fake that.
No.
And I would love to think that with Butch Cassidy and Sundance that they have a relationship as well, off screen or an admiration, whatever it is that allows those moments to come through. Because that is where the vulnerability is where you perceive it as an audience, is in those moments that are genuine. And they usually only come when the actors are being genuine between themselves, sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think, anyway.
Right.
For me, they've always felt like they could have been best friends who happened to get cast with each other. Like, it just reads that way in here in The Sting. Like, they always have that feel of just two actors who just have figured out how to work really well together, you know, and just there's just sheer joy watching them. And also I think that they are able to find the ways to play different characters, like here and The Sting, but still have that connection, you know. And I think that could be a tricky thing for actors to still be best friends, but totally different characters in totally different context.
Absolutely. And they were movie stars as well. That's the thing that nowadays, you know, I feel the movie stars they're different. It's a different world now. It's a celebrity world, less movie star, if you like. And they were the real deal in as far as I was concerned. They were the real movie stars. And when you think of people like Warren Beatty and you know, they're a different generation, different sort of legends. But I always think of them as just pure movie stars.
You know who I feel like inherited the mantle of friends who make movies together? Well, of course, Affleck and Matt Damon, and Clooney and Pitt.
Yes, right? Very much like that.
Yeah.
And the
the stories that we get from Redford and Newman, I don't think Robert Redford names his film festival Sundance without some long-term allegiance to his friend Paul. I
think that's lovely. Yeah, you're right. That's great. I hadn't even really thought about that, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. I think it's just when you see those relationships on screen, as I say, you can't hide. They can't hide. They're not trying to be vulnerable. They just are, because there's a natural camaraderie between them.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting as a film that has such moments like raindrops keep falling on your head, and then ends the way it does with the shocking, brutal, at least done in a freeze frame, but otherwise brutal end of these two characters and ostensibly their version of the Old West. That is for some people, it could feel like a little bit of a tone shift to have a movie like that is so fun, and they've got such kind of like this joie de vivre as characters who end up having such a brutal, hard ending to the film. Does that shape the way that you approach films like this, where it's like it's this fun story, but it also has a dark ending where the two characters that I've loved through the whole 2 hours are kind of just completely killed by the Bolivian army?
Says you. I think they got away.
Oh, do you? Oh, yeah. No, I don't know. Look, I think I like stories that don't Hollywoodize things too much. I've worked on different films where it might have a bit of a dark ending and people are very nervous, and sometimes the audiences don't respond well. But I think it's a genuine approach to storytelling. And there was no other way those guys were going to go out of there. We knew that. So, I just, it was a firing squad, really, wasn't it, at the end of the day?
Do you know what's interesting about it, though? We've already had I think, a more sort of, a more dark sequence in the film when Butch and Sundance, our hero characters, assassinate 5 bandits on the hillside, right? That was a sequence where our heroes are taken down a peg because do heroes,
Yes.
they hadn't killed anybody until that point, right? They've just shown off. And now we have a sequence where we realize, one, they're ill-equipped to do the thing that they're about to have to do. And two, we see them actually killing these guys, and the camera lingers on the bodies and the shapes of the bodies as they hit the ground. And it takes time to finally extricate us from this mountainside. And I think that is a darker sequence than the end of the movie. The end of the movie feels to me like the end of a fairy tale. Like I joke about, I think they got out, but you know what? Like, it ends like a dream. I could make the case that I want to end the film in a way that they live forever.
Yeah, no, I agree. That is a dark moment, but I think what's interesting about that for me is that it's the whole sequence starts when they're trying to do good. They're trying to go straight. Yeah. This is our chance. Let's just have normal jobs like anybody else. And of course, it just ends in hell. So it was. I like that counterpoint, as dark as it was, because it was light before that, very light. Suddenly, they've turned a corner. And of course, they end up in a dark alley. So it was good story point. But you're right, that was a darker moment than the end in some ways. The end was inevitable. We didn't really see that coming.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic film. I am so glad that you brought it to us to have this conversation with us, and that we had a chance to chat with you about Wicked and all of the work that you did on that film. And again, cannot wait to watch this, which should be in theaters by the time this goes out. So everyone will have to go check that out.
I'm looking forward to let me know when you've seen it.
Yeah.
Send me an email, because I would love to know what you think, because I'm incredibly proud of it. After all these different years, it's definitely been one of the high spots for me, big time.
Yeah. Well, and this is coming after having just done West Side Story with Spielberg. So,
look, next year I'm going to do Steven's next film, and that will be my 21st movie with him.
Wow.
Jeez. Well, there's a filmmaker who really commits to working with the team that he's built around him.
I love him, and I loved West Side Story. I just wish more audiences had seen that one, because I thought he did a spectacular job with it. Really
very difficult time for, it was right at that point post COVID where people were like, do I go back to the theaters and watch it now? Or it was a very hard time for people. So
it was a tough time, but boy, did he do a good job. That music never sounded better again. Beautiful.
And certainly performances in that one also that will stand the test of time for sure.
Yeah.
So,
I hope people find it. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, you keep up the good work. You're doing such amazing things out there. We are always a fan of the work you do, and getting a chance to chat with you just is very special. So again, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I love chatting about movies. I'll do it anytime.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
For everyone else out there, we hope you like the show, and we certainly hope you like the movie like we do here on Movies We Like. Movies We Like is a part of the True Story FM Entertainment Podcast Network and the Next Reel family of film podcasts. The music is Chonk Clap by Out of Flux. Find the show at truestory.fm and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Threads, and Letterboxd at The Next Reel. Learn about becoming a member at thenextreel.com/membership. And if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, we always appreciate it if you drop one in there for us. See you next time.